We have a Bible reading this morning. Matt is speaking to us a little bit later on, and he's asked for two readings, Mark chapter 8, 34 to 38, and John 8, 25 to 34. So starting with Mark. Then he called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? If anyone is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will be ashamed of them when he comes in his Father's glory with the holy angels." And from John chapter 8, verses 25 to 34. "Who are you?" they asked. "Just what I have been telling you from the beginning," Jesus replied. "I have much to say in judgment of you, but he who sent me is trustworthy, and what I have heard from him I tell the world." They did not understand that he was telling them about his Father. So Jesus said, "When you have lifted up the Son of Man, then you will know that I am he, and that I do nothing on my own, but speak just what the Father has taught me. The one who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do what pleases him." Even as he spoke, many believed in him. To the Jews who had believed in him, Jesus said, "If you hold on to my teaching, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants and have never been slaves of anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" Jesus replied, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin."
Morning, everyone. I hope you're doing well. My name is Matt, just in case we haven't met, and I'm one of the leaders here at MCC. And again, it's fantastic to have you with us for our Sunday morning service. Thanks for taking the time to be here. So, a couple of quick questions just off the bat. Is there a more moral side in the Israel versus Palestine conflict, or are they equally immoral? Is biological sex actually a thing, or is it a construct? Will we see our loved ones after we or they die? Were the Lions really the better team over the entire season? Okay, so some big questions. And I promise we're going to answer all those comprehensively this morning. No, we're not. But I figure these were some really good examples of, I guess, like what you could call big truth questions. Big truth questions. These questions, and I think often people's almost immediate responses to them, emotional responses to these questions, demonstrate that truth matters. Truth still matters. To answer any of those questions, some, if not all of us, would find at least some of them important, and to answer any of them would require some kind of truth claim from us. And again, for some, if not all of us, I'd wager that the answers to those questions would be bigger in scope than "this is true for me." Instead, the answers would be "this is true full stop," and or "this is true for all of us." So, for example, people I don't think were demonstrating just about a month ago in the streets of Melbourne because they had mere opinions and they wanted to share those mere opinions with the world. People who demonstrated on either side were convinced that truth was on their side, or at least they were on the side of truth, right? They weren't just there to share mere opinions. Now, Christianity, at its heart, makes a huge truth claim. The historical figure that is the real man in history, Jesus of Nazareth, was and is God. That is undoubtedly a huge truth claim. This and next week's sermons are going to be all about trying to make a case that believing this truth claim at the heart of Christianity, that Jesus is both man and God, is a reasonable thing to do. Or at least I'll be trying to make a case that believing this isn't stupid, it's not ignorant, It's not wishful thinking to think that Jesus was actually who he said he was, both God and man. Now, most of us, I reckon, in this room are going to fall into, one of two broad categories. Now, you may already believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be. You may identify as someone who's a Christian. Now, I don't think this is the same thing as saying that you're confident or clear as to why you think and believe that. Perhaps you think that or believe that now just out of habit. It's been a long time since you believed that, and it's become part of who you are. It's almost habitual. Perhaps you believe that Jesus is who he claimed to be because it comes from your family of origin. You've grown up in a family who believe that, and you still believe that. Perhaps you believe that these claims of Jesus are true because you find it comforting for you. But you wouldn't have the confidence to make that claim to a friend or family member of yours who didn't believe that. You wouldn't go as far as to say, this is good for me, I think it'd be good for you as well. So that's the first category. If you're not confident about why you believe what you believe, then hopefully these couple of talks will be helpful. Now, the second category of person is someone who isn't sure if they're a Christian, or they're not sure about Jesus' claims, or perhaps they're definite that they don't believe in them. If that's you, then welcome. I am so glad you're here. Please hit me up with any questions or objections afterwards. Hopefully, if nothing else, these two talks will be useful for you too. If you disagree with me at the end, at least you know what we're disagreeing about. And that's something. So again, over the next 2 weeks, I want to try and present why believing the claims that Jesus made about himself are true. And to do that, I'm going to walk us through a path. Now, this isn't the only pathway to believing in Jesus. It's probably like a common one. And I want to be really clear, what I'm presenting here, it's not a formula, if you like. It's not a prescription. I firmly believe that God brings and draws people to himself in so many different ways. And all those ways involve his spirit reaching out and grabbing people, if you like, or at least alerting people or wooing people via their spirit. That's something that you can't manufacture through arguments or logic or anything like that. But what I'm hoping to describe is more like a map of a possible path that God may use. That's all. This isn't my idea. It's something that I've kind of come across at school over the last couple of years, but I found it really, really helpful, and I found it really, really encouraging. So my hope and prayer is that it's helpful for you guys and encouraging as well. So this path, this map, it's got 3 stages with each one, if you like, leading to the other. And I've called it reality, Ruach, and resurrection. So I'm going to be arguing that there's such a thing as a reality, there's a Ruach, and there's a resurrection. And that's a path to believing in Jesus and the claims that he made about himself. And again, one stage will lead to another, and again, it's only a path. It's not the path, it's only a path, but it's hopefully a useful one. This morning, we'll be looking at reality and Ruach. Next week, we'll be looking at resurrection. That's where we're going, okay? Let's go. So it's 1943, and George Orwell, the famous British writer and essayist. So he's going to be publishing Animal Farm in a couple of years, and then 1984, a couple of years after that. But in 1943, in the middle of the Second World War, he writes that he often had the feeling that the very concept of objective truth was fading out of this world. So it's all the way back in 1943. Now you jump to 1968, so like the height of the swinging 60s, and you got Francis Schaeffer, the kind of famous apologist, and I guess like almost kind of hippie. He wrote that the problem with communicating Christianity to a new generation was centered on a new view of truth that detached it from objective and knowable reality. So that's Schaeffer in 1968. Now you jump again to 2016, and you've got the Oxford Dictionary's word of the year, post-truth. And post-truth is described as relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. And then you cue 2024, and plenty of commentators seem to be suggesting that politicians and political parties will be judged less on policies and more on vibes. Vibes that I say are a lot more conducive with emotion and personal belief. So what is truth? Does it correspond to an actual objective reality? Or is it all a matter of personal opinion, group consensus, and those with the power defining the rules for everyone else? The Bible, I say the church throughout history, and plenty of classical philosophers generally have maintained that there's an objective reality that the truth points to. So God is a God of truth, whose word is truth. And you read that in places like John 17:17. The Holy Spirit is famously called the Spirit of truth. Jesus is called the truth and the life. The Old Testament prophets, the New Testament apostles, Christ himself, and New Testament church leaders all give warnings about people who are going to distort the truth. And then famous, not particularly Christian, non-Christian people like Plato, Aristotle, or Christians like Augustine, Descartes, Locke, Hume, philosophers throughout the past hundreds of years, some pretty heavy philosophical hitters have all argued for a view that truth corresponds to an objective reality. But way back, again in Socrates' time, which would have been, I think, roughly around the time of Christ, one of Socrates' contemporaries, the philosopher Protagoras, I didn't know that he could claim this quote. I've heard the quote before. I didn't know that it came from him. But he wrote back then, he argued, instead of there being an objective truth, he said, man, people, man is the measure of all things. Man is the measure of all things. Which sounds to me a little bit like you do you. So people do their own measuring. That's what he was arguing. We, people, determine truth and reality. We are not measured by an objective standard. We're not judged by some kind of external reality. Instead, man is the measure. I do the measuring. Now, you may have heard something like this described these days as postmodernism, a notoriously hard concept to kind of nail down and define pithily. But for our purposes, we'll just say that it's a claim that says there is no such thing as objective truth, particularly of the moral variety. So none of history's famous big stories are actually true, whether that's Christianity, whether that's Islam, whether that's pantheism, whether that's Marxism. None of these things are actually true. They're all social constructs serving certain people at certain times. And I'm going to say there's at least, and these are hardly original ideas, right? Plenty of people smarter than me came up with these. But there's at least two problems with this take. And that the first one is the claim that there is no objective truth. That's actually an objective truth claim in itself. Okay, so like that makes sense. Like that's pretty obvious, right? But it's kind of handy to point out. Saying that there is no such thing as a big story is a big story in and of itself. Denying objective reality, setting up a new kind of objective reality. But I think more pertinently, the claim that truth claims are all constructed and don't correspond to an objective reality just doesn't live up and match how we operate as humans in the world. So if you go back to those original questions that I asked, think about those. Again, think about how you feel when people ask you those questions. Or think about how you feel if you stop and ponder the Holocaust. Or if you're old enough, just recall where you were and what you were doing and how you felt when you first heard about the Twin Towers. I can still remember that. And I don't remember who was reading the news, I don't remember exactly what people were saying. First and foremost, I remember the feeling. Look at the moral indignation that people on both sides invest in American politics. It's not just opinion, it's not just personal preference. People may be loath to use the terms, but they end up talking about objective, universal right and wrong, not just right and wrong for me. And I think this points to a moral reality, which I think is like parallel, if you like, to a physical, material reality. And this is where it starts to intersect with believing in Christ, because the Bible points to an objective, physical, and moral reality. God made creation and he judged that it was good. God has given humans food and drink and sex and humour, all to enjoy. God revealed his moral, if you like, law through things like the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount. And again, this law, it's not abstract, it's not capricious. It's based on, it is steeped in his loving character. And it's all about humans and human societies flourishing. It's for our good. Again, it's not out of spite, it's not capricious, it's not abstract, it's for our good. So here's the point of all this. Remember, this is just the first stage of the path. But you could kind of summarize this as saying, I can trust my senses. I think you can trust your senses, both moral and physical, because I think that they correspond to an objective reality. So the pain that I feel when I'm betrayed by a loved one, this is not an illusion. It's not in my head. It's real. The guilt that I feel after I am unkind to a friend is not a social construct. It's real. It's indicative of something. The coffee that I imbibe every morning, even if it's just instant, is something that I should be thankful for. It's part of God's good creation. The love that I have for my wife and children, this is somehow reflective of something eternally important. It's not just something that's going to fade and go in this mortal coil. And the intuition that I had that every life is sacred is not just middle class, first world, indulgent morality. Do you see that? All this stuff actually counts and points to something that is real. So there's still a chance, right? There's still a chance that all of this, I'm actually just a really vivid dream that a particularly gifted AI robot is having somewhere in the future. But the evidence that I see in front of me doesn't favour that. So I take my chance, right? I take my chance. I take this small act of faith and say that I'm a realist. There is an objective truth that corresponds to an objective reality, and being human, I have some grasp on that. Now, maybe some of you here in the room are already yawning on the inside, which I appreciate. It's better than yawning out loud. Maybe Mike's yawning behind the mask. That's a good idea, yeah. And thinking, so what, like, this is nothing new, right? This is just obvious, Matt. But again, I'd argue if you think that, it's because you just take it for granted. But many people more and more don't take this stuff for granted. The question of objective reality, particularly of the moral kind, informs everything more and more, everything from what's going on in the Ukraine to what's going on with kids at your local school when it comes to gender identity. And critically, I'm not saying that it's just Christians talking about this stuff, because it's not. Loads of people, both inside and outside of the church, are talking about this stuff. So it matters. This stuff really matters. If there's a reality, including a moral reality, then there is something or someone that determines that morality. It doesn't just pop into existence. Someone deems this is moral, this is not. So there is something or someone bigger than morality. Okay, so that's the first stage of the path. There's actually an objective reality that truth corresponds to. Throwing back to the 90s, the truth is actually out there. And if nothing else, this infuses your existence with meaning. It infuses it with meaning. It is not a meaningless universe if there is some kind of objective reality, particularly of the moral kind. Okay, step one. Step two, Ruach. I went with this title because I was just after another word that began with R, for the sake of having 3 R's, okay? But Ruach is Hebrew for spirit, Ruach. So it can denote the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit. It can also denote human spirits as well. So the spirit is an immaterial, that is like not a material that I can kind of easily detect with my 5 regular senses, reality. Something that is real, but not easily picked up, measured, or quantifiable by our scientific go-tos. Now, here's the big question. Assuming that you believe that there is some objective reality, does that reality have room for the spiritual, for the immaterial? Or is it purely material? Again, the stuff that we can measure, quantify, establish via the scientific method. Where's your ceiling in life? Does life finish when you finish, when you're dead? Or is there more? Are you open to that? And the Bible and Christianity, of course, is on board with this. And also historically, the vast majority of people groups and cultures over the vast majority of known history are also on board with the existence of the immaterial. The last couple of 100 years for us in the West and the first world being skeptical about something beyond the material, we're the historical exception, not the rule. But this may well be changing. So check this out. This is like just an example that came across my desk recently. So this is Russell Crowe. This is him on the Joe Rogan podcast, maybe like literally, I don't know, two months ago. The Joe Rogan podcast is one of the biggest podcasts in the world, has millions and millions and millions of subscribers. And Russell Crowe was being interviewed, and it turns out, I found this interesting, that because of his role in Gladiator, like way back all in like 1999, 2000, 2001, it turns out he's treated like royalty in Rome. So Italian citizens love him because of that one movie. So a few years ago, he took his family to Rome for a tour, including his elderly mother. And they got a private tour of the Vatican. So they shut down parts of it from the public, just Russell Crowe and his family, including his mother. Now, his mother, critically, was reticent to go because the last time she'd been in Rome, it was with her then, as in at the time of him telling the story, his deceased father. So the last time that she'd been in Rome had been with his father, her husband, and she was worried about going back there and visiting again because of the memories. So he had to convince her, his mother, to join them. Mid-tour, he asked how she was finding being back in the Vatican. And she said, surprisingly, she felt that there was this presence, this tangible presence of her husband, her deceased husband, with her in the Vatican. Could like feel it like palpably. And just after that, on as part of the same tour, they heard in the distance in the Vatican, they heard a band playing Danny Boy, the Irish song Danny Boy. And they inquired about this, like who's playing this music and why. They inquired about that to their tour guide. And he says, look, it's impossible. That's the Vatican Guard Band, and the Vatican Guard Band only play religious music. And then they double check, and it turns out that it's indeed Danny Boy. Some visiting dignitary from Ireland was going to arrive in the next couple of days. So as a special concession, the band were learning and playing Danny Boy. Danny Boy was a song that they played at Russell Crowe's dad's funeral. And it was just like amazing. He almost like choked up. You saw like Joe Rogan blow out completely taken aback. And they argue this has got to be something more than just coincidence. There is something going on here that is more than just coincidence, something that is unseen, larger, something immaterial is putting all this together. Now, like lots of people have these kinds of experiences. Plenty of people in this room, no doubt, would have undergone something similar, I think. But you've got to remember, this is a mainstream, hugely popular podcast, and 3.9 million people, last time I checked, had viewed that. So they've watched this episode on YouTube and heard Russell Crowe talk basically about what sounds like a God experience. Does this example promote Christianity? No, it doesn't. Does it even like push some kind of regular spirituality? No. But does it make the reality of the immaterial, the spiritual world, more plausible? Yes, I think it does. Do they hint that more and more people are open and hungry for something beyond the material? Yes, it does. That's what I believe. And that example particularly squares away with what we all hope for, right? That death will not be the end for our relationships with our loved ones. That life, in some form, continues. So, 2 stages of the path towards believing Jesus is who he said he was. 1, we trust that reality exists. There is truth, including moral truth, that corresponds to an objective reality. 2, the reality contains a spiritual, immaterial component bigger than just what we can measure and quantify. Now, both these things alone aren't enough, I think, to convince someone to believe the claims of Jesus, but they're still necessary. They get you on the path. If you get this far, you'll be open to believing in God or gods. But then the question is why? Why, if you believe in God or gods, why go with Jesus? Why go with Christianity? Why believe his claims rather than someone else's? And that's what we'll be looking at specifically next week with resurrection. So to finish, what may these first 2 stages mean here and now if you're a Christian? I guess this is a warning. I think we need to watch out for a new word, a new term that I came across today, apatheism. It became popular in the early 2000s, and here's a definition. Apatheism, a benign indifference, refusing to become passionate about one's own beliefs or the beliefs of others. A person may have religious preferences, but they are not the engines of energetic commitment, nor do they fuel controversy. This person is neither called nor driven by these beliefs, but just has them. And this was touted as being a good thing by an atheist, apatheism. So he said, the world will be a better place if more and more people had this belief, if they took their religious belief only this seriously. So refusing to become passionate about beliefs, not becoming energetically committed about them. Why may this be a trap for Christians? Maybe, and I'll own up to this at times, maybe it's fear. Maybe like we heard read from Mark chapter 8, it's possible that we can be ashamed of Jesus' words and truth. We're scared of losing face and status in the world, so we just don't get that energetic about what we say we believe. Maybe it's not fear. Maybe it's like pleasant diversions. There's just so much good stuff going on in life, I can get quite easily diverted from what I believe is true and knowing Christ more and more and talking about that truth by all the good things that God has put in my path. Or maybe it's our suffering. Life can be hard. We can be genuinely suffering, but there's always a risk that we get lost in that. We can become consumed by it and we lose sight of the truly bigger picture. Or maybe, and I think this is probably the most likely one, maybe it's a misguided humility. G.K. Chesterton, the famous Catholic apologist back in, I think, 1903, I just found this photo of him. He looks like a kind of guy you could have a lot of fun with, I reckon. He just looks like a good time, G.K. Chesterton. He was worried back in 1903 that humility was moving from what he called the organ of ambition to the organ of conviction. People basically were moving from being humble about their own personal ambition, which he thought was a good thing. It kind of tempers the potential arrogance. Instead, they were becoming too humble about truth convictions, specifically ones that involved God. So he argued, of course, humans are meant to be humble about themselves. That curbs our arrogance. But we're not supposed to be humble about God's truth. That can lead to cowardice and becoming apathetic or apatheistic. We can get overconfident about ourselves and we can get timid about our truth convictions. He saw that writing on the wall back in 1903. This is not an excuse to become arrogant in your truth convictions or a bully or supremely confident when you shouldn't be supremely confident. It is just a plea to make sure that we direct our humility in the right direction. Because I think, there's a chance that we are apatheistic. We can become scared, distracted, preoccupied by our own suffering, or the wrong kind of humble. And we'll see this if we're not confident, if we're not natural in talking to our friends about the truth, about what we believe. And we can see this in our own lives if we stop to pray for people in our own lives as well. We simply lose confidence. And I think this matters because we've already seen people are understandably concerned about truth. They still crave it. And that makes sense, right? Like we heard read from John chapter 8, Christ's words. The truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. The implication there being that some people are currently not free. People are suffering. Even if they're not aware of it, people are still suffering. Our friends are suffering. Our family members are suffering. The world is becoming harder and harder to make sense of, and we are people who claim to have had not even an encounter with the truth, but with the being himself who is truth. Given that, we can't risk benign indifference. So look, just as a kind of last little summary, and every time, even putting this together, it still surprises me. If you're just a regular, vanilla, if you like, type Christian, then you believe, right, in the truth of a malevolent evil who is bent on destroying humans. That's orthodoxy. You believe that the stakes are eternal. You believe that death is not the end. You believe that as a follower of Jesus, you are actually indwelt by the Godhead. You literally have God inside you who is empowering you and changing you. You believe that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses who in some degree are cheering us on and desperately want us to succeed. And you believe that God himself sent his son, also God, to earth on our behalf to live, die, and be resurrected out of exceeding love. And that is a free gift that is offered to us. You believe all that stuff. Now, people can accuse you of being crazy, weird, and wasting your life. But in the light of all that, people shouldn't accuse any of us of being indifferent or boring. There's no room for indifference there. No room for indifference if that's really what we believe. Okay. Let me pray. Father, I thank you for your revealed truth. I thank you for your revealed character. And I pray you'll give us boldness if we're being timid in terms of talking about what we believe, if we're being reticent in wanting to know you and your Son more and more fully. Give us courage. Again, if we're just becoming a little bit apathetic, Father, I pray that you will make us not so lazy. Help us realise that we don't have any reason to coast. There is just more and more of you to know and to come to learn about and to love. And Father, I pray that you will compel us more than anything out of love for you and out of love for our fellow humans. Help us again not get distracted or preoccupied by good things or not so great things. Just help us, Father, again, see that people desperately need to be in a relationship with you. This is how you design us to live. You want us to flourish, and that means being in a relationship with you and then being put in a right relationship with each other and the rest of creation. So please embolden us, but do so purely out of love. Help us in the middle of this always remain humble, not arrogant and not egotistical, I pray. Amen.